Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. On behalf of the University of Southern Indiana and Historic New Harmony and the Gallery of Contemporary Art here in New Harmony, I want to welcome everyone to the Social Alchemy Symposium. Like Jim and Shantae said, we've been working on this for quite a while, and so it's so good to see it finally come to fruition. And I'm happy to introduce the next session. My name is Leslie Townsend, and I'm the Director of Community Engagement in Historic New Harmony. And I'm going to introduce Dr. Sylvia Rode. Dr. Rode received her PhD in Germanic Studies from the University of California, Los Angeles. She serves as the Assistant Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Director of the Center of Communal Studies at the University of Southern Indiana. Her research focuses on the harmonist, communal history, and utopian theory. And then our second presenter this afternoon will be Jennifer Green. She is the Associate Professor of Library Science and University Archivist in the David L. Rice Library at the University of Southern Indiana. She serves on the Center of Communal Studies Advisory Board and manages the Communal Studies Collection. And Jennifer and Sylvia will both be presenting on contemporary utopias and planned communities. And I just want to, you are here in New Harmony enjoying this beautiful town, and I just want to say how lucky we are at the university to have such a unique program. And in addition to New Harmony and the New Harmony operations and properties that we oversee, the university is also fortunate enough to have the Center for Communal Studies. And so we have our director and our board member and archivist for that. So that's really a treat. So without any further ado, I will go ahead and introduce Sylvia Rode.
Please. Okay. Thank you for your kind introduction, Leslie. Jennifer Green and I have prepared a two-part presentation for you today. The first part consists of an introduction on utopian theory and examples of utopian community classifications, and the second part focuses on a traditional intentional community. First, though, let me give you a little bit of background on my interest in utopian studies. It began, as Leslie pointed out, at UCLA when I attended a Walter Benjamin seminar, followed by lectures on the Frankfurt School, Expressionist Film and the Holocaust. I also spent a considerable amount of time with UCLA's urban planners, most of them Marxists who, in their utopian visions, would remake the city of Los Angeles. Moreover, I learned about utopia as political thought, with a focus on fascism and the pursuit of a racially pure society that ended in totalitarianism and a German-made catastrophe. Later, after I had visited intentional communities, I began to explore classifications of utopian communities, which resulted in a model that identifies four groups, namely traditional isolationist communities, and Jennifer will talk about one of them, embedded showcase, or what I call Uber communities, involuntary communities, or heterotopias, and cyber and online communities. But first, some thoughts on utopian research. As I see it, utopian research can be pursued in two directions, namely in utopian theory and utopia in practice. While utopia in theory deals with utopian constructs of the mind, utopia in practice focuses on concrete manifestation of utopian thought, that is, utopian communities. Nevertheless, there can be no utopia in practice without utopian theory. Likewise, the realization of utopian theory in practice is led ad absurdum because once utopia is realized, it ceases to exist as a place nowhere. Furthermore, my exposure to utopian thought between the wars have taught me that the call for a better world is closely linked to totalitarianism and violence. While scholars have mostly focused on the outcome of utopia, they are now concentrating more on its preconditions. To be precise, the negative, concrete conditions that ignite the imagination. By concrete conditions, I refer to the same social conditions that in the past have caused rebellions or perhaps revolutions. In their reassessment of utopia, the literary critics Frederick Jameson and Terry Eagleton and the historian Russell Jacoby echo this shift when they state that the primary function of utopia is a critique of the status quo, not a master plan for the future. So much on utopian theory. Let's look at utopia in practice, meaning communities and my classification model. And please note that this is a very simplified model here. And due to time constraints, I will just whip through some examples. The first group in this model I call traditional isolationist utopias. These manifest in fiction or as intentional communities, and they share the following characteristics. Their existence challenges or even threatens the status quo. Think about Murus, the writer of Utopia who lost his head in the 16th century, or the harmonists who left or had to leave Germany because of their political and social rebellion. So these utopias offer new ideologies and trigger evolutionary processes from within that eventually cause their failure. They are geographically isolated, usually housed in rural settings, and their contact to the outside world is heavily regulated. Naturally, they are governed from within, and they are future-oriented. Another example that belongs in this group and that I have worked with is August Engelhardt's Sun Order, which was founded in 1898 in Papua New Guinea. I have researched this colony of fruit and vegetable eaters, specifically cocovarians. After Engelhardt graduated from the University of Erlangen with a degree in physics and chemistry, he conducted an 18-year experiment in Kapakon Island, living a natural life just on coconuts. An example of the third classification, namely the involuntary utopias or heterotopias, is Camp Breckenridge, a former German POW camp in Kentucky. For its inmates, Camp Breckenridge came to represent what the French philosopher Michel Foucault called a heterotopia, an actually realized utopia. In other words, a place of segregation and expression, an expression of utopia, but nevertheless without promise. Over a period of 2 years, the German prisoners transformed the camp into a meticulously arranged enclosure that was in stark contrast to the chaos and destruction of the war. Moreover, the conversion of a wasteland into a flourishing landscape provided a place of discovery and transformative experiences, only to disappear shortly after the war. My fourth classification are cyber or virtual utopian communities. You may also have come across the term utopian metaverse. These communities hold the belief that online communication can bring about more decentralized, democratic, and libertarian societies. However, there is room for caution. As the Oxford Companion on Social Media states, there is a naive optimism that focuses on the internet's positive political potential for participatory democracy and freedom, a leveling of hierarchies, a blurring of the roles of producer and user, and a fostering of collaboration. But what gets downplayed in all of this is the internet's use for surveillance and manipulation, and the promotion of consumerism. An example of an utopian community that belongs in group 4 is Minutia, an online community where you can create and customize your own avatar, play games, chat, and make new friends. But let's return to the second group, the embedded showcase, or what I call Utopias. These utopias are best characterized as state-sponsored communities that share the following characteristics. Sorry. Here's Manusha. I'm one behind here. Okay. They do not pose a challenge or even a threat to the status quo. They are the brainchild of a high-ranking political leader or wealthy developer. They are geographically and ideologically embedded. They are close to urban centers, and they are not isolated. In fact, outsiders are encouraged to visit. Most often, they are embedded in nationalist, socialist, or communist systems. Indeed, these government-sponsored utopian communities are established during a time of cultural and political openness. As showcase communities, they are used as propaganda, and that is why they are located within cities to be accessible to visitors, for they can provide a glimpse into the ideal workings of a given political system. Before I get into my main examples, however, let me quickly draw your attention to 4 examples of marginal showcase utopias that share some of the before-mentioned characteristics, but not all. And there we have Sun City, a retirement community in Arizona, the Forbidden City in Beijing, Disney World, and the artificial Palm Islands in Dubai. For the remainder of the presentation, I will focus on 2 perfect examples of utopian showcase communities, namely Berlin-Marzahn, a planned community in former East Germany, and Huaxi, a planned community in present-day China. The Konrad-Siedlung in Germany, which was established in the mid-30s by the Nazis, also fits this bill, but due to time, I will not talk about this particular community. So Marzahn and Huaxi it is. Both communities were established under the watchful eyes of the government. In the case of Berlin-Marzahn, the former East German Socialist Unity Party and its leader Erich Honecker, and in the case of Huaxi, the Chinese Communist Party. These cities represent ideals within an existing government system. Moreover, they did not pose a threat to the status quo, since they embraced communism and socialism respectively. Marzahn aspired to become the ultimate workers' paradise, and in the case of Huaxi, the #1 village under the sky, guaranteed by a perpetual flux of work and play that prevented evolutionary processes from within. At the 1971 Party Congress in former East Germany, Erich Honecker discussed the country's urgent problems of housing shortages. He wanted to build housing, not luxury apartments for the few, but social apartments in new suburbs, free from masonry antagonism of the poor and rich. The new housing strategy was to replace old buildings devastated by the war and shift the focus away from the wall that divided East and West. Marzahn was to become a housing project of the future, an architectural tabula rasa of sorts that would replace bourgeois architecture with real existing realism, the envy of the capitalist West as well as the Soviets in the East. China's richest town, namely Huaxi in the province of Jiangsu, underwent a similar process. It was the creation of Wu Renbao, an official of the Communist Party who, like his counterpart Erich Honecker, rose through the party ranks. During a time of economic and political liberalization in the 1980s, Wu began his utopian capitalist experiment, getting rich of the global market and then reverting it into a true communist state where everybody would share in the wealth. In the backwoods of Jiangsu province, he established textile, steel, iron, and chemical factories and global distribution centers. Under the omnipotent Communist Party secretary, Huaxi became China's epicenter of manufacturing and a model of party success, where every man and woman and child was living well. At times, however, state ideology and propaganda took on comical forms. Every morning, the village song is broadcasted over megaphones and loudspeakers. There's also little privacy in Huaxi, since everyone listens to one voice. But as Wu argues, you have to give up freedom in exchange for higher standards of living, where cooking oil, rice, and cars, for example, are free. The story goes that each family now has over 150,000 in their bank account and is provided by the village with 2 brand new cars, a villa, free health care, and stock in companies. Similarly, Marzahn became a housing paradise of sorts, watched over by the party. Besides free education, health care, retirement benefits, and daycare, it boasted the first movie theater in East Germany, and new apartments came with central heating, warm water, a balcony, and PVC flooring. Even though life in both utopian showcase communities revolved around work, leisure played a major role. Wu and Honecker created parks within the communities, not unlike little Disneys, that brought the world to their respective communities. Wu created the World Park with sightseeing attractions such as the Sydney Opera House, the Arc de Triomphe, the Great Wall, and the Statue of Liberty and the US Capitol. Since travel in former East Germany was equally restricted, Honecker also brought the world to Marzahn, when the community hosted the Gardens of the World project in 1987, showing Chinese, Balinese, Japanese, and Korean architectural replicas, Labyrinth, modeled on Hampton Court Palace and Chartres Cathedral, as well as Italian Renaissance gardens. These leisure parks, even today, attract thousands of admirers. Marzahn and Huaxi were held in high esteem by their leaders and celebrated for decades as the perfect communities. Thank you, and I stop right here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here to talk about one of my favorite new communities. So today I'm going to talk about organic and natural, the Shiloh Church and Trust. In the beginning, as they say, in 1939, a retired gentleman from New Jersey, Reverend Eugene Crosby Monroe, wanted to start a community to assist World War II veterans to heal and grow after their wartime experiences. It started as a simple missionary outreach, but it grew into a community. It started as the Shiloh Bible School in 1939. As I said, it was founded by Reverend Monroe. He's often referred to as Father Monroe in the community. Although he was ordained in the Church of England, he did not subscribe to any one religious organization. Rather, he created his own religious identity based on the interpretation of the scriptures. In his own words, the underlying concept of Shiloh is a practical application of religious teachings in the rehabilitation of men and women. The community consisted of 3 major ideas or foundations, as you can see represented here in the triangle. The first, and the most important, was the resurgence of the Spirit through religious stimulation. The second, represented by family, was a return to the simple fundamentals of living and insulation from life's artificialities through simple, honest labor close to the soil. The third, represented by corporation, is the recognition of the economic realities of human existence through training in occupation or trade to enable men and women to stand on their own feet, live in dignity, and face life with security and confidence. The name Shiloh Trust is adopted in the 1950s when they reincorporate themselves. So here you can see one of the vehicles from the old Shiloh Bible School. In the center, we have Father Monroe and his second wife, Esther, and then a representation of the community values. To support the community, a young Greek man who was studying with the group, Theodore Zarpas, suggested they become bakers using an old Greek family recipe. The bread was so popular that the community soon began a delivery service selling the products across the area. The community believed in growing its own materials to ensure the highest quality for the bakery. So here you can see Theodore as a young man, and you can also see the first and initial farm, although many more will follow, and not only community members working, but here we have Father Monroe on the tractor, practice what you preach, and he and his wife Esther baling hay. Here are just some of the houses that were owned by the community members in Sherman, New York. By the time the community moves to Sulphur Springs, Arkansas, they own at least 12 homes and/or farms in the area of Sherman, New York. By the late 1940s, the bakery was such a success that the community expanded their line of baked goods. They purchased trucks in order to be able to meet a growing demand. Farms were expanded. Other farmers were enlisted to grow and produce materials for the bakery and the community. Early in the process, however, Shiloh community insisted that the products be as clean and wholesome as possible. They had farmers, now remember, late 1940s, they had farmers agree not to use pesticides or herbicides, and later even some fertilizers are going to be refused. This was to ensure the highest quality of ingredients. The community produced their own milk, eggs, grains, even honey. Here in the center, you can see Warren Clow. He was the head chemist who tested all the grains in analysis. That's also him working the beehives here. By the 1950s, the community was listing the ingredients on the labels of their products and nutritional information, so customers knew the products were healthy. The community was ahead of its time with such labeling practices. It wouldn't be until 1965 that the US government would begin asking companies to supply this information on product labels, and the practice is mostly voluntary until 1989. Certainly Shiloh was ahead of the game. So here are just some pictures of life in Shiloh in the bakery. Notice the baker's schedule. This is one of the employees of the bakery. He's at the bakery by 6:10, in bed by midnight. Where am I? Okay, here are just some scenes from the community. Again, these are the early years in New York, but it wasn't all work, right? The community had a band. Here's some pictures of people playing Scrabble and kids just having fun. So in these, you can see some of the religious practices. Father Monroe practiced water baptism. But they had their meals were communal. They met every day before work, as well as having services on Sunday. And they put in a permanent croquet court. In 1962, after the death of their leader, Father Monroe, in 1961, the community had been handed over to his son, Raymond. However, tragically, Raymond dies in 1962. And so James Janish, a longtime resident of the community, becomes the leader. James has an inspiration, and he moves the community to Sulphur Springs, Arkansas. He does this so that they could be more centrally located for shipping products nationwide. Here you can see Esther, Raymond, and Eugene Monroe. The gentleman here in the nice 60s shirt, that's James. And this is actually James on the far end of the cake. This cake is celebrating their first nationwide distributions. They purchased an old resort property from the old railroad days. Here you can see an advertisement and a picture of the resort at its height, and a picture of the property's main building, which would become the bakery, among other things, when Shiloh moves in 1969. The land was actually originally purchased by scouts who wanted to start the John Brown University there in Sulphur Springs. But at some point, after acquiring a lot of land, they decided to put the university elsewhere. They sold the property to the Wycliffe Bible translators. So when James comes along and the property is for sale, he sees this religious connection in history, and that's part of his inspiration. The main building, as you can see, was very large. Also, you can see down here the smaller building that copies the larger one. This was actually a staff hotel, or a place for staff, when this was a hotel in the 1800s, but they're going to turn this into a guest house. The community did many improvements to the properties. They also purchased other homes for community members, much like they did in New York. They also acquired farms, both for farming of grains, but also dairy. Even before they left New York, the business had grown to such proportions that they were purchasing many supplies from local farmers. The grains and dairy were checked for purity before using, although it's said that Warren became so good that he could look at a load of corn or wheat and know whether or not it was good. They added a loading dock capable of having several semi-trucks at the same time. They expanded the main building for more automated equipment, larger ovens, proofing stations, packaging, and storage. As you can see, it was a very extensive bakery. They also had a storefront, just like they had in New York, but they are shipping nationwide at this time. The Shiloh School, which was opened in Arkansas, was an elementary school. It was open to anyone in the area, not just community members. Later, they'll convert this building over to a retreat center as the children population begins to decline. Through everything, Shiloh maintained its Bible school, and the community members met daily for prayers and fellowship. The meals were communal up until the day the community ended. In fact, moving to Arkansas actually allowed them all to eat in one large building at one point. They renovated a large area in the back of the hotel in order to create a large meeting room and that dining hall I mentioned where the entire community could meet. And they also built an industrial kitchen. Here's just some more fun photos of life at Shiloh. These kids are actually sledding on the front steps of the old hotel. They built more buildings, like the school and the church building, which also had large meeting rooms for different groups. They hosted a lot of things for the community as well. So this was the main chapel, and actually the lower level of that building was the school. The community was a recipient of a new gym, or auditorium, if you will, from the government. There was a program, apparently, after World War II, where communities could apply to receive old gym buildings from U.S. military bases. These buildings were disassembled. You had to arrange to move it and put it back together yourself. Apparently, many towns and organizations took advantage of this in the 60s. They purchased several houses, as I said earlier. Some were single-family dwellings, some were used as dorms. Many of these homes had to be renovated or repaired. For those of you who don't know where Sulphur Springs is, and there's no reason why you should, it's about 40 minutes out of Bentonville, Arkansas. So it's kind of the middle of nowhere, Arkansas. Here's the main house. Beautiful bungalow house. Has a very interesting story, though. So the gentleman who was sent there by John Brown University, they built the initial bungalow, which is those two center columns that you see there on the front porch. And as the story goes, that every time he left town, his wife added to the house. So eventually, that's the side of the house. You can see it grew into a monster building. This was used by lots of community members when Shiloh was there. The house had 6 bedrooms and 2 complete apartments in the back. Before renovations of the old bakery with that industrial kitchen I mentioned, they held their communal meals in the main house, and often their study groups were there too. So the bakery was located on the lower part of that big, large main building I showed you earlier. And they actually took many of the old hotel rooms and they converted it for older community members, kind of their own nursing home / retirement center. And again, this wasn't just for community members. They opened it up to the entire community of Sulphur Springs. The rest of the building was used for offices, because keep in mind, at one time, this was a Fortune 500 company. Here are just a few of the products from Shiloh. The company label was actually sold to a former member, and it does continue today out of Pennsylvania. He also had to sign agreements to keep the business organic and natural. Here we have veggie burgers, beans, grains, all of this maintaining a high quality of their products. The labels included things like how to cook this particular thing or suggestions of how to use the product. So for instance, on the garbanzo flour, it says this is a good thickener for soups and sauces. Let me go back. I go back? Maybe? Maybe not. Anyway, there was, there we go. There was also a report of the chemical analysis on that page, if I can get back to it. Come on, you can do it. This is a problem with doing animations, right? Nitrate-free hot dogs. Here you can see that, so they continued the practice of doing grain analysis on all the products that came through Shiloh. These are some images from when I collected this community history in 2015. You can see me standing with Anna Lee. She was the wife of the current leader, which is James Janish. He's down here in the lower screen. Most of the materials I brought back were from a 3rd-story attic. That was fun. You can see all the boxes I had staged here. But the important thing is that we have this community's collection from literally Father Monroe's seminary days in the mid-1930s all the way up to the day it closed its doors. The business had grown and was producing thousands of food-related products. Eventually, the community would expand to a line of clothing, candles, household products. But around 2017, Mr. James closed the business. He felt the community had lost its mission and had become too commercial. Unfortunately, soon the community members began to leave and the community dissolved. However, thanks to Dr. Donald Jansen, we were able to preserve this history and bring it to the University of Southern Indiana. At the University Archives and Special Collections, located at the David L. Rice Library on the USI campus, you can see these records of Shiloh Church and Trust from its humble beginnings to its end. The collection includes information on business, religion, educational programming, and individual members. There are pictures of the community online, and there is an inventory or a finding aid of the collection available online as well. This was a unique community with a singular mission. Often we think of organic foods as a more contemporary notion, but Shiloh is an example of how communities were thinking progressively about food sourcing and environment long before the practice became mainstream in society. Thank you.